Hello.
Today we're reminiscing about cabins because this is the end of an era. We will no longer have a cabin.
Your grandfather bought it
Mm-hmm.
Or built it.
and,
Both.
and built the original square, and then your dad added on to it a little bit.
So my grandpa bought land, and this is going to be so interesting because I know a lot of us have grown up with a cabin in the family or access, or you rented a cabin, and it's a disappearing thing now. So
At least
we're
in
just kinda
Minnesota,
putting this to rest.
it's part of our kind of like culture
Mhm.
to have a lake
10,000
house.
lakes.
So my grandpa bought this, and it was going to be their retirement. So he built a little cabin, and then at the top of the road, he was going to build a year-round house. But he died really young, and so none of that happened. My dad was in his first year of college. He was going to be a pastor, but he had to quit because there was no money, and he went home and supported his mom. So he took care of his mom. And when my parents got married, she lived with them until she died, and so he inherited the cabin. So that was the story of that, and it was as is for a long time, and then slowly over time we added to it 2 or 3 times. So that was the story. So I grew up, we're going to go through, I'm going to talk about my experiences growing up, and then you coming in when you started, and then your experience, looking at over time and our own experiences. We all own our own experiences of the same thing, and I find this really interesting because I wasn't really fond of a cabin growing up. And now it's like everyone would just love that. and my memories are quite different. We spent weekends and then 2 full weeks at different times, 2 different weeks there in the summer. But I really couldn't go in the water because I had hay fever so bad. And I would, with my hay fever, I would have to sit up sleeping a lot of the time in the summer. So the water, it was a great fishing lake, but it was hard for swimming, so I could do that. I also couldn't go play in the woods because I was so allergic to poison ivy. So in fact, one of my really strong memories was when I was in 4th grade. I had poison ivy so bad up and down my whole right leg, and it was full of pus and draining. It was just gross. I wore long pants because I thought I was dying, and I didn't want my parents to worry about me. I just
You didn't
sensed at
tell
that
them?
time that there was something major going on. Isn't it's just funny how you do that? So I kept it hidden. And when they finally discovered that, they were just horrified because it was so badly infected and it was so terrible.
Also, just if you think of the logic of this,
Yes.
I think I'm dying. I'm gonna save my parents from knowing
Yeah.
about it.
Yes, so I'm just going to go away and just die myself in bed sometime. And, but a child's reasoning. And I thought, and that's so tied into the cabin. It's so interesting, and just being careful I didn't itch around them. And it was just a horrible disaster.
I even have a poison ivy story to tell about Karen.
Yes.
Before we got married, she was a counselor on a canoe base one on the St. Croix River, and I, for some reason, decided to go up and see her one Saturday afternoon, and I pull up, and here Karen is. She got bit by a spider, and she got poison ivy back to back on the same, and her whole face was just,
It was swollen shut. I could barely see out of one eye.
she looked like a monster. And when I took her home, I drove her
But
all the
get
way
this,
to
the
Jackson.
camp was letting me hitchhike. I was going to go hitchhike looking
my
like that to
goodness.
Jackson.
Times have really
And this
changed.
camp was going to let me,
Yeah.
which is really interesting.
And
And
I
so he
showed
happened
up.
to come up and he couldn't believe it.
So I drove her all the way to Jackson.
Oh, and before that, we stopped at a restaurant.
Yep.
And I was in the bathroom, and this little girl just screamed because I just really scared her. So that's how bad it was. And we get home to my
We get
house.
home, and we walk in the house, and Artis, her mom, says, Tim, did you hit her?
Oh, she just screamed. No, she thought I was hit by a canoe.
Oh.
That was her thought.
I thought she thought I hit her.
No, she thought I was hit by a canoe. And I just thought, that's how bad it was, because we hadn't given them any warning. And we went to the doctor, and I had to just lay on sheets for forever. So truly, I was really allergic
You
to
were.
poison ivy. But it's funny how that colors, your thoughts.
So how would you spend these 2-week stretches? Like just reading?
Well, here's the other thing. I'll get into that, but here's my other thing that was always for me a hard thing. My mom worked all the time. My dad loved being at the cabin, and I could see it. He was out fishing and all that. My mom wasn't really a boat person. She was forever cleaning this cabin. Well, now my mom and I would have different cleaning. We would all be outside after just an overnight there. Well, she scrubbed the floors, and then we could leave, so no one could come driving in. Now, mind you, we have an outhouse. We have an ice box. We get ice delivered in those great big ice things, delivered for our ice box. That was our refrigeration. We're hauling water from a well, and she's still scrubbing the floor after a short weekend trip. But between how much effort it went in for her to keep things clean, to cook, to do all that, I just have visions of my mom just working all the time. And then, I would go help her when I needed to, but I've just never enjoyed that part of that. So it's interesting because those are kind of, and then of course by the time I was a teen, I'm missing everything at home because, we're gone every weekend. So it's interesting how your experiences, but I would have never complained. I made the most of it. And my favorite things to do there, I did tons of reading, of course. That's always been my salvation. And one of my favorite, when we'd stay for the 2 different weeks, we'd go to town one day, and that was so exciting. We'd each get $1 to spend. And one of my sisters and I would always get paper dolls. We'd play for hours with the paper dolls. And my other favorite memory was at night, in a cabin, the walls just went part way up. And so we could hear everything. It was like in one big room. And I just remember my 2 sisters and I were in one, they were all just tiny bedrooms. We're all in one bedroom, but at night laying in bed listening to the adults, my dad's brother and his wife were often there, and just listening to them laugh and their stories. And I just remember that being fun. And so, yeah, it was, but mostly I did a lot of playing inside the cabin. So it's just interesting, the perspective. So it has never been my dream to have a cabin. So then Tim was entered into cabin life. And I wanted to say the very first time you came, I hadn't prepared my parents for the fact that, I don't think I even knew that you talked in your sleep. And of course, in this little cabin, he's yelling at his dog and he's whistling and he's doing all this stuff. And my mom is just in stitches. So that was their introduction to Tim. And the other best story of all time was soon after that, Tim brought along his friend who was blind. Michael. And the next morning, my mom was so upset with Tim. She just said to Tim, how in the world could you let Michael get up at night and go out to the outhouse by himself? And Tim goes, well, you didn't say anything about that yesterday and it was light out and he went out by himself. Do you think night mattered to Michael? And then she caught that and it was like...
He was totally blind.
It was so funny. So we laughed about that for years because that was just so... that obvious thing of her just thinking he was being a terrible host, and him knowing light or dark isn't going to make one bit of difference to him.
That's funny. Do you remember first going?
Oh, yeah. I remember catching about a 9-pound northern, and it was the biggest fish I ever caught. And in our what do they call these things? Photo album, there is a picture of me and you. I should have gotten it. It is just the best.
With the big fish, is it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And you and I.
Okay. Yeah, so we had good times. It was much more fun when you started coming out, and then when we had kids, our summers were spent every other weekend. We went camping with friends, and the other weekends we went to the lake. So it was every other, from Mother's Day into MEA. So we never spent weekends home, but we did that the whole time. So then we get into your perspective of the lake.
Yeah, I feel like the memories I have probably mostly exist when I was like 7 to 10, 11, 12. And the cabin itself, I also remember laying in bed listening to the adults talk. The original cabin was like a square with little partitions put up that were just essentially serving as bedrooms, but you could barely call them that. And they only had curtains.
Mm-hmm. Right,
so it was
no
like
doors. So
it was really no privacy. But yeah, like the coloring books, the meals we would eat at the table, and when you walked down the front of the cabin to the right was kind of like a swampy, wooded area that I would spend hours like collecting frogs and
It was actually
exploring.
a spring.
Yeah,
a spring that came out into a
But when it was wet out, it
Yeah.
would have like some standing water
Yep.
in this whole basin, and then the lake was like right there. But fishing was a big part of dock fishing and using the trolling motor on the fishing boat.
That was a big deal, getting to take the little trolling boat out by yourself. Or
Yeah, I
with
remember
a-
like the first time
with
I was
a cousin
allowed.
and going
yeah,
down and
yep.
I think, and maneuvering that around. is
Learned how to
very
water
cool.
ski there, and it makes me laugh because this was like a small fishing boat with
Yes.
not a very
Didn't
powerful.
go very fast.
Like there's no chance it would pull me up now, like zero chance. But yeah, like so we since we no longer have the cabin as of like 2 weeks ago or a week ago,
Yep.
Yep.
it is sold, and that's like probably around 100 years,
Mm-hmm.
close to it, that your family had it.
And it will be demolished. It was falling apart, and so it was definitely.
My last memory of the cabin, the day Jamie told me that I was going to be a dad, was a Saturday morning, and we went that day to the cabin with my friend, and we reopened it, I think for the first time in a handful of years that anyone had really used it. And we used it that whole summer, but it was like pretty far gone. Like one of the additions they put on, which was where the plumbing wasn't done very well, and
Didn't work.
that
I mean,
summer,
plumbing was added one year.
several spots we stepped through the floor of the cabin, and so, but
And unfortunately, none of us kids were in the position to put money into fixing it. So that was the problem. It just really did deteriorate.
and I mean, growing up, I don't remember you putting money into the house to fix the house either.
No.
It's like we just weren't the kind of family that was interested in owning.
No, and we
second property.
barely got by. I mean, it's kind of we did anyway. So that we didn't do extra things. We didn't.
Right.
But one of the additions they put on was the front porch,
Right.
and I always thought it was fun because our family of 7, and that includes the wheelchair. But we would take that whole porch and be wall to wall people,
Yeah.
and that would be that was our spot for.
Yeah, and there was like a little black and white TV
Yeah.
that picked up 3 or 4 channels.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
but I mean, like, at a visceral level, like one memory, or kind of like one long-term memory would be the summer storms. And I feel like being in a cottage and having like the thunderstorms and the
Very
heavy
little
rain.
between you and the.
Yeah, it was just like a very visceral like experience, and I
Kind of magical, yeah.
fond memories of storms rolling through. And in fact, I was just talking to you before we started recording. In 1989, so I would have been 10. The Michael Keaton like Batman came out, and a couple of my uncles were gonna go because it was a stormy like summer night, and I was like pleading with them to let me go, and it was like a big conversation. It took probably an hour of convincing you to let me go.
So
And
that means he's a good talker, right?
salesperson.
A convincer.
But it's just like we were laughing because that movie, if Hank was 10, it wouldn't even cross our minds that he couldn't go.
Yes.
It's just times are
Times
different
have
now.
changed. Yeah.
But since we said goodbye to the cabin, we had your brother grab a tackle box, and we thought we'd just hold up some of these like beautiful old lures.
Fishing is such a strong memory. The other memory I was just thinking as we were talking, so my sister and I would play paper dolls in on the bed. There was a hole. It was a knot in the wood. That was actually a hole. And, of course, there
You
was
see
no
that?
insulation. We could look through that and
Oh.
watch everything that was going on.
Oh, totally.
Of the people fishing. Do you remember that? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And I know we'd been there, but we'd still, every now and then, we'd keep an eye on what was going on outside and see what we were missing. Things like that are just very fun. These
Yeah,
are
very fun.
amazing.
Yeah, some of these are made in Finland, France. A lot of them have like a Minneapolis, company
These two are
stamped on it.
France.
Yeah, this is from France.
Well
Like,
used.
these are probably like, I'd guess like valuable things even back then. And my wife was looking up on eBay. A lot of these go for like $40 or $50. It's just kind of an interesting like, little one like this. At the time, I remember thinking like these are just like dangerous. You got to handle them carefully. But now I'm admiring like how beautiful they are. This old like wooden bobber.
I love bobbers.
Yeah, these are the tools I learned how to fish with. And speaking of my brother Andres, he's the big fisherman in the family, and this is also where he learned how to fish. And he just became a dad yesterday on your birthday.
On my birthday.
So do you want to grab one of the photos of Andres?
Yeah, here's on a couple of them, Andres, and we did. Photos weren't the same then, but he's going to send a couple of these to him because he was the true fisherman in the family.
And he still is
yeah.
a fisherman. He lives on Nantucket.
And as a little guy, he was so patient. He would just sit and help Grandpa dig night crawlers for just, he'd do everything for hours just by his side quietly. Were you a quiet child? No. No.
Yeah,
Josiah always had ideas to do things faster, better.
I like that one.
But I just think that's very fun. And then we have a couple of use. This was really fun to show Hank because this is this one's my favorite. Is that no? This one's my favorite with Grandpa. Just
I do want to tell a story
Oh,
about.
oh,
I don't really
yes.
remember this story, but
I remember it well. My dad was so patient with the kids and just loved being with the kids. And when you were probably around 10, you fell off the dock into the water and you claimed that Grandpa pushed you and you insisted on that. And my dad would never push anyone. So we all knew you lost your balance, but that was your story and you were
I
sticking to it.
don't lose my balance.
And
So that's the
cabin.
front. Yeah, it's
The
front of
finished cabin, and this is, oh yeah, I guess this was it too. This was one of my early scrapbook pages. Are any of you like me, where you did this and left space for writing, but then you just don't write in? Because I don't like my own handwriting, and I can't think of what to say. So it's still waiting for me to do that. I need to just turn all that over to Tim. But I love that picture of my dad just sitting out
Yeah,
on
show
the
that again
dock.
because that is somebody from a boat
Hey,
took the
tell me if-
picture.
Can you see it?
Someone took the picture unbeknownst to him. He wasn't posing for anything. He was just fishing.
And deep in thought is what,
Deep in thought.
So I always understood that was my dad's peaceful place. And also being able to work on the yard and that kind he loved all of that. It was just so different from being home. So it's just interesting looking at the different roles and how we did this. And part of why we're talking about this is we want to hear your stories. I mean, this is such a pastime. So, in a future episode, we're going to be sharing some of the stories that we received. But growing up with cabins has been such a routine thing.
And if you're like,
so long.
I think if you're not in Minnesota, it'd be interesting to hear. Was there a cabin culture where you live or where you grew up? And if your family had a cottage or a cabin, like, is it still in the family? How did that play out?
Definitely Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So I will say I have lots of fond memories. I wouldn't take that. So even when I talk about, was it my favorite thing growing up? But boy, those memories are, when you look back, it's all part of what enriches your life and makes you who you are. I mean, it is just kind of who it is. So
I think
it is awesome.
Josiah's shirt, I think, has the Pink Panther on it, but I'm not sure.
I don't know.
It's a cartoon.
So hopefully you've enjoyed this trip down memory lane with us. And we're going to end with a card. Since we're talking about family today, I just wanted to share this card. This is a store card. Tim's sister, Mary, who is also one of my best friends, many of you know, had a stroke
Just a little over 2 years ago.
2 years ago, and is now in full-time care and doesn't have conversations and things. Some of the people in our lives has sent routine cards. Kathy Ost is one of them. She's a friend. She knew Mary, but so have some other people that have never met her. And Mary's daughter, Kristen, who's the adult, sent this fabulous card to Kathy, and I asked Kathy if I could borrow it. She just said, "Kathy, I just wanted to thank you for all of the cards you sent to my mom. They're all beautiful, and we are both grateful." Love, Kristen. I again think that's the power of the card, and it means as much to Mary's daughter, and even the grandkids when you come in, and the staff when you come in and see that people cared enough to send a card. And I think that is one of the gifts in what we get to do.
And Kathy was my pen pal when I was in Vietnam,
Yeah.
which really was a long time ago.
So thank you.